From Eyewitness News, breaking news.
15 days after she led a private investigator to the body of 5-year-old Lucas Hernandez, sources tell Eyewitness News Emily Glass committed suicide early this morning. Glass is the live-in girlfriend of Jonathan Hernandez, Lucas's father. She's the one who reported the 5-year-old missing more than 3 months ago. We have been monitoring this story since it broke overnight. Katie Johnston has been at the scene of the shooting near Kellogg and Edgemoor, gathering the latest information. She joins us now live. Katie.
Natalie, good morning. We're standing, as you mentioned, just a few blocks south of Kellogg right now at the home that Emily Glass and Jonathan Hernandez once shared with each other. And I want to give you a look at the scene just behind me here. You can see that there are no longer any officers out here. The scene is clear. They left a little less than an hour ago from the scene, and you can also tell there's no crime scene tape around the home. Jonathan Hernandez is who called police out here around 1:45 this morning. Police say that he called them out here because he found a woman inside not breathing and with a gunshot wound. Then when emergency crews arrived at the scene, they pronounced that woman dead. An independent source for Eyewitness News tells us the victim in the shooting is Emily Glass, and she committed suicide this morning. Emily Glass reported Lucas missing in mid-February, but was arrested shortly after Lucas Hernandez's body was found in rural Harvey County 2 weeks ago. Private investigator David Marshburn, who was hired by the family to help find Lucas Hernandez, says Glass led him to the location where the missing 5-year-old's body was found. Lucas had been missing for more than 3 months. Emily Glass was arrested that day on charges of obstruction and interference with law enforcement. Then last Wednesday, she was released from Sedgwick County Jail. And the district attorney told us that day that they were not pressing charges at the time and could not tell us if or when charges would be filed. Now, we've been talking to police and someone who says that they're a friend of Emily Glass. Here's what those folks had to say.
So I can't really at this point tell you whether it was a homicide or not until that investigation is completed. Do you know?
There are still facts coming out about this case, and there are still more facts to come out about this case that people don't know. She never got a chance to tell her story, and now, unfortunately, she never will.
We tried to ask Emily Glass that day last Wednesday when she was released from Sedgwick County Jail what happened to Lucas Hernandez. She held her head down the entire time, did not speak to us, but appeared to be emotional. Again, Jonathan Hernandez, the boyfriend of Emily Glass was the live-in girlfriend of him, reported this morning that he found her dead inside his home, or she was not breathing, rather. And then we learned that that victim is indeed Emily Glass. We're going to continue to follow this story here at Edgemoor and Gilbert all morning. We're going to bring you updates on KWCH 12 and online.
Katie, thank you. Up very early this morning. Today's news is the latest development in a case many of you have been following for months. It began February 17th when Lucas Hernandez was reported missing from a home near Kellogg and Edgemoor. Initial reports said his father's girlfriend, Emily Glass, was the last to see him in his bedroom around 3 o'clock that afternoon. Police launched a full investigation, calling in the FBI to help. Now, 4 days after Lucas disappeared, Emily Glass was arrested on 2 counts of child endangerment. She was only officially charged with 1 count, which was not related to Lucas. Glass sat in the Sedgwick County Jail for months awaiting trial. A jury ended up finding her not guilty of that charge. But before that, Fact Finder 12 investigator Devin Fassbinder talked with Glass from jail. It was an interview you saw first on Eyewitness News.
Did you hurt Lucas?
I did not. I would never hurt my son. He's my son, too, you know. I may not have given birth to him, but he's my baby boy today. I take care of him every day.
A little less than a month ago, Glass went to trial. A jury acquitted her, and Glass was a free woman. 8 days after Glass left the Sedgwick County Jail, private investigator David Marshburn says Glass led him to this rural road, more than 20 miles from where Glass said Lucas disappears. This is at 96th and Woodlawn in rural Harvey County. Marshburn, who was brought in to help find Lucas, recorded some of his conversations with Glass. Crime Stories with Nancy Grace aired portions of those last week.
I don't know what Lucas looked like when he passed away. Was he on his back? Did he throw up? Did he choke on his own vomit? Was he just bed, dead on the couch. Huh? He was on the bed? On the couch? On the bed. On his side or on his back? On his back. Do you realize how good you feel right now just by saying? But do you feel a little pressure away by telling me about Lucas a little bit? But you're okay. You are not a bad person.
Glass was booked into jail again hours after Lucas's body was found. She was held on suspicion of interference with law enforcement and obstruction, but 6 days later she was released without any charges. District Attorney Mark Bennett said the investigation into Lucas's death remains active, and we just checked with the Sedgwick County coroner this week. The autopsy on Lucas's body is still pending as well. Now, in a podcast that aired just within the last 4 days, Nancy Grace reported the autopsy findings showed Lucas may have been dead for days before he was reported missing. Eyewitness News has not been able to independently confirm that report, something we're still asking questions about, though. Now, that podcast also included an interview with Jonathan Hernandez, that's Lucas's father. He talked about what Glass told him following the death of his son.
He's sorry. She can't believe she could ever do this to me. She can't believe she could ever do that to Lucas and leave him out there, and that she's a horrible person. She said that she had panicked. I'm not sure if it was because she was smoking meth, which I had no knowledge of, but I asked her the same thing. You know, why didn't you call 911? Why, you know, if that's what happened and it was an accident or he was asleep and he died for something, why not call 911?
When you asked her why she didn't call 911, she just kept saying she panicked?
Yeah, she just panicked.
Again, the new development this morning in the Lucas Hernandez case is the death of Emily Glass, and we know it's a lot, so here's a recap of what we've learned overnight. A source tells Eyewitness News Emily Glass, the live-in girlfriend of Jonathan Hernandez, who you just heard from, committed suicide early this morning. It happened inside a home near Kellogg and Edgemoor, the same home where Glass reported Lucas missing in February. Wichita police provided a briefing on the situation a few hours ago. They say Hernandez called 911 around 1:30 to report that shooting. You may have first found out about this when you woke up and saw the KWCH 12 News app. We have been updating our story there all night and all morning. We will continue to do that as the investigation continues, so make sure you have your alerts on and stay with Eyewitness News on air for updates.
A small body has been found in South Harvey County.
This is about bringing justice for Lucas. No charges are being filed today, while investigators continue to follow up on newly developed leads.
Emily, how did Lucas die?
Lucas strong!
How did Lucas die? Did you accidentally kill him?
No questions today.
We are following breaking news this morning. Sources tell Eyewitness News Emily Glass committed suicide early this morning at a home near Kellogg and Edgemoor. Katie Johnson has been there since shortly after that news broke. She joins us live now with the developments that have happened over the last few hours. Katie?
Natalie, good morning. You can see that right now this street behind me is clear from police officers. This home right here is the home that Jonathan Hernandez and Emily Glass once shared with each other. Earlier, the street was filled with police officers, lights on, responding to the scene. All we knew early this morning was that there was a shooting and that one person had died. We've learned since then that Jonathan Hernandez called police when he arrived home to find a woman not breathing in his home. Police say that he called them immediately, and when emergency crews responded, they found that that woman had died from a gunshot wound. And an independent source for Eyewitness News tells us that the victim in the shooting is Emily Glass, who died in an apparent suicide. Emily Glass reported Lucas Hernandez missing in mid-February, and she was arrested shortly after Lucas Hernandez's body was found in rural Harvey County 2 weeks ago. Private investigator David Marshburn, who was hired by the family, says Glass led him to the location where the missing 5-year-old's body was found. Lucas had been missing for more than 3 months at the time that his remains were found. And Emily Glass was arrested that day on charges of obstruction and interference with law enforcement. Then last Wednesday, she was released from the Sedgwick County Jail. The district attorney told us that day that they were not pressing charges at the time and could not tell us if or when charges would be filed. Earlier this morning, we spoke to several people had arrived on scene, and we spoke to one who identified herself as a friend of Emily Glass, and she said there's still a lot to be seen in this case.
There's just been too many tragedies and deaths now involved in this entire case. And now the one person that could have told us some of the details of that is no longer with us.
We know a source identified Emily Glass as the victim in this shooting. She died in an apparent suicide. We're going to continue to follow updates all morning from this home on South Edgemoor. You can follow updates, of course, on KWCH.com and on Channel 12.
Katie, thank you. Joining me now in studio is personal protection expert Joe Shalacy. Joe, you have a long history of working in law enforcement. We called you with this news around 4 o'clock this morning to see if you could come in and share your expertise. What was your reaction?
Tragedy. That was the first thing that went through my mind. When I got the call and I picked the phone up, I just gasped, and just the first thought I had and said to my wife, this is so tragic for just everybody involved, including this community.
Yeah, tragic for Emily because she felt the need to take her life, and possibly tragic for Lucas because Emily may have had some key information to help investigators figure out what exactly happened to that little boy. Absolutely. Unfortunately, if she did take her life, she also took answers with her. So you're right, it is tragic for Lucas and his family. Talk about, you have a long history in law enforcement. Talk about the challenges, now not having Emily, the challenges that law enforcement and prosecutors face in at least determining what happened to Lucas. She was key. Well, some of those answers will be answered when the autopsy report comes out. It doesn't mean that this investigation is over. This will be ongoing for quite some time. In hopes of being able to develop some of those answers, because at the end of the day, that's what the family and everybody that's involved, including this community, is looking for. I mean, you can't say closure because there's never going to be closure, but answers. Yeah, answers, and answers are hard to find. At this point, Emily was not held in jail on charges. She was out of jail. We don't know if she's responsible for killing Lucas, or as she told Lucas's father, Jonathan, she found Lucas dead and moved the body. A lot of questions still yet to be answered. What's next? What's next in this case? I would think the next step would be waiting for the autopsy report and to see what kind of answers are within that test. But I would also warn the community to not set themselves up, and family as well, for failure, because we don't know what that autopsy report's going to show. It may not show what they're looking for. Yeah, a lot of questions, a lot of assumptions by the community. Very passionate about this case with this missing 5-year-old boy who's really stolen all of our hearts. Joe Shalacy, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this morning. We'll hear from Joe a little bit later on in the newscast as well. In the meantime, we're following these latest developments. Emily Glass, the person who reported Lucas Hernandez missing, who led a private investigator to his body 3 months later, has reportedly committed suicide. We'll be right back.
From Eyewitness News, breaking news.
3 months ago, this stretch of Edgemoor south of Kellogg was a crime scene. It was where 5-year-old Lucas Hernandez was reported missing. This morning, police were there for a different reason. Sources tell Eyewitness News Emily Glass committed suicide at that same home. This was the scene early this morning as police tried to piece together what happened. Katie Johnson has been in front of that home now for hours, updating you on Facebook Live since around 2 a.m. and live here on KWCH 12 went on air at 4:30 this morning. She joins us now with the latest of what we know so far. Katie?
Natalie, good morning. We know right now Emily Glass is the victim in a deadly shooting that happened at this home on South Edgemoor in Gilbert. A source close to Eyewitness News tells us that Emily Glass died in an apparent suicide. Take a look at the scene right behind me here. Police are no longer at this home, but earlier today there were several officers lining the streets investigating what happened early this morning shortly before 2 o'clock. We know that Jonathan Hernandez Emily Glass's boyfriend called police to this home shortly before 2 a.m. because he found a woman inside not breathing and with a gunshot wound. When emergency crews arrived at the scene, they pronounced that woman dead, and an independent source for Eyewitness News tells us the victim in the shooting is Emily Glass, who died, as I mentioned, in an apparent suicide. Emily Glass reported Lucas Hernandez missing in mid-February. She was arrested shortly after his body was found in rural Harvey County just 2 weeks ago. Private investigator David Marshburn, who was hired by the family to investigate Lucas's disappearance, says Glass led him to the location where the missing 5-year-old's body was found. Lucas had been missing at that time for more than 3 months. Emily Glass was arrested that day on charges of obstruction and interference with law enforcement. Then last Wednesday, she was released from Sedgwick County Jail. The district attorney told us that day that they were not pressing charges at the time and could not tell us if or when charges would be filed. Now, we spoke to police officers on scene earlier today when they were still here. Here's what they had to say about this incident.
He returned home and discovered a female in the residence deceased.
Again, a source close to Eyewitness News tells us that victim is Emily Glass, who died in an apparent suicide. We're going to stay on scene all morning, bringing you all the updates in this developing story.
Katie, thank you. And just into our newsroom, the private investigator who worked to help find Lucas is reacting to the news that Emily Glass committed suicide. Lucas's family brought David Marshburn to Kansas to help. We spoke to him over the phone this morning, and he talked about the moment he found out Glass took her own life.
Do we know if there was a note left? Do we know exactly, what? Are we ever going to know what happened to Lucas? I do know a couple of things, but I told law enforcement, and law enforcement's going on that autopsy and the toxicology report. And this has been eating at Emily since she got out, and I have had several calls where people were trying to get me to talk to Emily or get Jonathan to talk to Emily because she wanted to tell everything. Only if some things would happen with her daughter, basically. And now, she's gone. So what do you do?
Marshburn recorded his conversations with Glass. He shared them on Nancy Grace's podcast, Crime Stories.
Do you realize how good you feel right now just by saying? But do you feel a little pressure away by telling me about Lucas a little bit? But you're okay. You are not a bad person.
As we mentioned before, Emily Glass led a private investigator who you just heard from to Lucas's body. That PI is David Marshburn. Marshburn shared some audio recordings of his conversation with Emily on a SiriusXM radio podcast with Nancy Grace. Eyewitness News was the first to bring you snippets of these recordings where Glass told the PI that she, quote, did Lucas wrong. Here's another clip of Glass telling Marshburn how she says she found Lucas on the day he died.
I don't know what Lucas looked like when he passed away. Was he on his back? Did he throw up? Did he choke on his own vomit? Was he just dead in his bed? Dead on the couch? Huh? He was on the bed? On the couch? On the bed. On his side or on his back? On his back.
We asked Wichita Police about these audio recordings. We were told they have no comments regarding the radio program.